Thanks very much. On Close Up this morning, the President's news conference. As we've noted, topics range from health care to welfare reform, but as expected, the news conference was dominated by Whitewater. In a moment, we'll go to the White House to get the administration side of things, but first, the Republican take on it. We have asked Minority Whip Newt Gingrich to be with us. He's on Capitol Hill. Mr. Gingrich, good morning.
Good morning.
You've said you thought the President's performance was impressive last night. Do you think he helped himself, helped his case?
Well, I think he always temporarily helps himself every time he shows up on television, because he's a very charming and a very likable man, and he's very, very smart. And so he always sounds plausible, whatever he's saying. And I think last night was a first-class performance by President Clinton in terms of once again seeming to be accurate. And then you read the morning newspapers, and whether it's Johnny Apple in the New York Times, or it's the Washington Post, or the Wall Street Journal, or the Washington Times, again and again this morning, you saw question after question being raised that he didn't answer. So I said last night, and I'd repeat today, we have two very believable men, Jim Leach on the House floor, the President in the White House, each sounding plausible, and the only way you're going to answer that is to have congressional hearings to get the witnesses and the facts out in the open so the American people can judge.
To your mind, what key questions remain unanswered?
I think there are a lot of questions that are unanswered. The President said there was no connection between Madison Savings and Whitewater. I saw Jim Leach in the House floor after the press conference. He said, you know, we just released today proof that on 8 different occasions, money was funneled from Madison Guaranty into Whitewater. Now, that's a pretty big difference between the two. And I would say that is an example. The New York Times this morning prints the story about the people in the RTC in Kansas City in the Resolution Trust Corporation office who thought there was criminal wrongdoing and thought that Whitewater directly led to the taxpayers losing over $100,000. The President last night shrugged that off and made a joke out of it. So I think there are a number of places you could go item by item and you find an enormous discrepancy between the very believable, very plausible, very smooth explanations of the President and the facts that just seem to keep cropping back up despite all the talk.
What's your view of the President's claim that if there was any pressure put on regulators, it was done not by his aides, but rather by career appointees of previous Republican administrations?
Well, in the first place, to suggest that a career appointee who is a career civil servant is partisan, I think, is quite extraordinary. I don't understand. If he hasn't investigated what happened at the RTC, I don't know why he would be making allegations that might well smear people who, in fact, I don't know, I've never met, are working in Kansas City apparently as just career civil servants. And it's extraordinary to have a President of the United States attacking 1 or 2 or 3 civil servants in a regional office in that kind of offhand, casual way.
The President, as you know, has pledged to fully cooperate with congressional hearings and did not rule out personal testimony. To your mind, will it come to that?
Well, I don't know what will come to that, but I think this is a wonderful shell game that the White House is playing. On the one hand, they make sure that Tom Foley and George Mitchell don't have any hearings in the Congress. Then they pledge they would cooperate, and gee, it's a pity that the leaders of the Democratic Party in the Congress can't quite figure out how to have hearings, but if they ever did, then the Democratic president would sure be glad to have the hearings, which are never going to happen. And it's very simple. We can put Whitewater off of page 1 by having the hearings and getting it out of the way. We can get back to health care and to welfare, to crime, to a lot of things we need to be working on by simply making sure that the hearings go forward. But as long as the Democratic leadership in the Congress wants to stonewall and cover up, you're going to see, I think, this remain at the center of the debate.
Final quick question. Although the polls clearly show the public's upset with the way the President has handled Whitewater, those same polls show that most of the American public thinks that his critics are politically motivated. You at all concerned that the pendulum may be swinging back and hurt Republicans?
Well, I think, first of all, there are a lot more important things in life than Whitewater. I think Korea is very dangerous. Mexico has had a tragedy. I think the economy is very important. I don't think Whitewater is at the center of the political world, nor should it be. And secondly, I think you always have an obligation, as Jim Leach pointed out yesterday, if you are the opposition party and the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House and have a monopoly on power, you have an obligation to be willing to demand the facts. I think most Americans, on balance, will decide that that is a real job.
All right, Mr. Gingrich, thank you. Let's go to the White House right now, where Mark Guerin is the administration's communications director. Good morning, Mr. Guerin.
Good morning, Brian.
I'm assuming you're pleased with last night's news conference. What are you hoping will be the practical effects?
Well, I think what people saw last night, I certainly agree with what Senator Dole and Congressman Gingrich said last night, that the President was forthright in his answers. He talked about the work of the special counsel, what he and Mrs. Clinton are going to be doing today in releasing additional tax returns to the press, and we'll be talking to members of the press about that, and then answering other questions related to Whitewater and other issues.
Why couldn't all that have been done 2 months ago?
Well, I think as the President said last night, if there was looking back, that might have been one way to do it. We'd like to actually judge ourselves by looking forward, what we're doing today. And I think the evidence that we have today about these tax returns will be helpful to people to explain the whole story.
Last night, the president revealed that he has consistently overstated his loss on Whitewater by somewhere in the neighborhood of $22,000, that he actually used that money to help his mother buy a cabin. Will you allow, Mr. Guerin, that it strains credulity to think that the lowest paid governor in the United States would have forgotten borrowing $22,000 and what he did with it?
I think you have to recall, Bryant, that this was 16 years ago. And the president has been involved in a host of other things since that, as governor of his state and running for president. This is 16 years ago, and it was a relatively small investment as part of it. But those are the facts. That's what the tax returns and other documents that we'll be showing today will allow for. And I think most people will accept that.
The president took exception to the presumption of guilt among his critics. Will you allow the way the White House has handled things basically have fueled that presumption?
Well, I think what the president spoke of last night was that there is more of a presumption of that than he had been used to, that there is more of that in Washington. But for whatever the facts will come out, the special counsel proceeds, the investigation proceeds, the House and Senate are talking about hearings. The main thing is that people will have the opportunity to review all of the facts. I think looking back on it, perhaps we might have done things differently in that regard.
At this point, are you prepared to say that you'd be better off with the hearings underway and over, and that's the only way you'll get this behind you?
Well, I think what's fair to say is the best way to get this matter behind us is for the investigation to proceed. It's a very professional investigation that Mr. Fisk is conducting. I think that will assure people that it's been thorough and complete. Once that's concluded, as well as the activities on the Hill, people will have an open sense of what's going on. That's what people want to know.
All right. Mark Guerin at the White House, thank you very much, sir.
Great.
Appreciate it. 7:15.